I'm not holding off on the INMB short. I'm going ham. I mean, listen, I don't think you should have a 50% of your portfolio in Sarepta, but I think you could have 10%, 15%, depending on your risk tolerance. You know, I got my process. It's worked for me. I am long Sarepta, yes. Not short circle yet. I definitely do want a short circle, but I'm mostly just waiting for this INMB to play out. Then I'll jump back in size in the other positions. You know, I want to get this account back into the green. I think this is the absolute bottom. Like the PMOs are worth a lot, but we can work on that. But right now it's all hands on deck for INMB because that company is reporting Alzheimer's data any day now. No, Barry got lucky and tried to be a biotech stock picker. He did really well with Sarepta. Not so great with cassava, although briefly he was up a lot in cassava. He's just a stock guy. Anavex comp approval could be any month now. We know it's not June. They could try to massage the data, of course. Yeah, he's an old Wall Street guy, basically. Been around Wall Street his whole life, real old goat. I did not close my quantum shorts. I'm very excited about my quantum shorts. This bubble is ending. In hindsight, you know, of course, if a position is negative, it's a mistake. But the question is really about, is it a mistake fundamentally? You know, would I rather have shorted these stocks at a higher price? Of course. I don't like being down a lot. I don't like being down 30% or 40%. But I also recognize that I can't necessarily control the timing. In hindsight, of course, I would have gone long and then stalled it and then gone short. But I don't have a crystal ball. And I can only go on what I understand and what I believe, which is these companies are worthless. So is it technically a mistake? Absolutely. But is it a mistake in my research or something like that? Absolutely not. You know, I'm still very confident in the position. Yeah, it's semantics. The momentum is disappearing. I agree. But I was asking, do you know if the Sarepta trials for the PMOs are all fully enrolled? Once the stock goes to 1, I'll make around $3, $4, $5 million bucks, and I'll probably donate it. Does that work for you? Yeah, Morgan Stanley did the IPO. It was a little rough at first, and all the demand went crazy. Good for them, man. I'm happy for them. I never shorted CoreWeave. Nobody Special Finance. Watch this guy. Nobody Special Finance. Here, let me give you this. He's almost got as many subscribers as I do. Look at this.
This is Aidan Toner Rogers. He's a 26-year-old PhD student at MIT and the author of some groundbreaking research that showed scientists at a large U.S. firm.
This guy is bearish on AI. He's not just bearish on GPUs and CoreWeave and NVIDIA. He's bearish on AI. This guy's got it like, you think I got it wrong. At least this guy doesn't trade because he'd be down 50,000x.
Would soon be doing its own science.
Does anybody think AI is like a scam? Like it doesn't work? No. He's skeptical of AI. He doesn't think AI is useful. It's hilarious.
She's an analyst over there.
Bro, the product of the companies is intelligence. That's literally the product. It's intelligence in a box. We've never had this kind of a product before. Who are these people, bro? I mean, this is hilarious how this guy could miss the forest for the trees. So this is a company that, let's just take a look here, that now has $44 billion a quarter in revenue. It's grown revenue. Just the Q1 revenue has gone from 8 billion to 7 billion to 26 billion to 44 billion. CoreWeave has a customer list that's like full capacity. There's nothing weird or shaky about any of this. I mean, it's pretty magnificent when you grow revenue 300%. Like, what's wrong with this guy?
As a fun fact, CoreWeave, located in Las Vegas.
How many times has this stock gone up since these guys started talking about it? It's the cringest thing I've seen. CoreWeave's up 5x. I mean, I think CoreWeave's a short, but they think it's like this fake company that is a shell. Like they started saying is a shell company. Oh my God. Listen, if a stock went from 14 to 140 and I was wrong on like the biggest trend in technology in decades, maybe even in a century. Probably the reason you're taking criticism from me is I'm more successful than you'll ever be. AI has changed the world. It's a $3 trillion company. Look, CoreWeave's my buddy sold his company to CoreWeave. He's a billionaire now. 86 billion market cap. Jeez. Oh, you can call up if you can. I think you are afraid. I've challenged you to debate many times. He's probably just going to scream when he gets connected. He's going to be like, ah! I do think it's going to 7 trillion or more. If those stocks don't go down, we could just go long every stock under 150 and make free profits. I think you're onto something. Do small caps outperform or underperform? Also, if we could just buy all small caps and wait. That's the plan. So what's up?
Yeah, man. I just wanted to like kind of walk through some this INmuneBIO. I mean, I think it's interesting, and you pointed out a lot of the kind of critical flaws with it. But that said, from like a mechanistic perspective, I think it just has, maybe more than a 40% chance, closer to like 50-50 at this point.
Okay.
Which is like not really reflected, I think, and it just makes the short a little scary and makes more sense as like a small long. That said, like I think there's a lot of mechanistic rationale why this could work, and there's also some data from like the TNF alpha inhibitors that suggest this is preventative. And I think the one data point that is like most interesting to me is it's coming from this 2017 Nature article, coming from Ben Baer's lab. It's titled "Neurotoxic Reactive Astrocytes Are Induced by Activated Microglia." Essentially,
okay, I'll pull it up.
Yeah, that paper kind of mechanistically lays out potentially how it is that amyloid is causing neurotoxicity.
Wouldn't this apply to MS?
No, because the MS is kind of like an autoimmune. It reacts to antibodies that are like mistargeted. Right?
T cells too.
Yeah, there's also T cells, but it's still like misappropriated immune targeting, right? Whereas this is just like amyloid beta. It shouldn't really be in the brain. Part of the process of sleep every night is, I don't know if you've heard of the glymphatic system.
Dude, I've been in biotech 25 years.
Yeah, so like, it's becoming more clear, I think mechanistically, at least to me, that the brain is supposed to clear its junk that it accumulates during the day from just normal processing and being awake. And the way it does that is by shrinking the neurons and then kind of pumping through like delta waves and beta waves, whatever, all of the junk out of the parenchyma and into the veins and the vessels, and it gets kind of flushed out. And the problem is when you don't have a good flushing process, that leads to accumulation, and then that accumulation eventually chokes out the organ and kills it.
What does this have to do with TNF?
So what that has to do with TNF is like a lot of the risk factors for developing Alzheimer's disease are either neuroinflammatory, as identified by GWAS, and also from an environmental perspective,
I thought it was ApoE.
Related.
I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off.
No, ApoE is also kind of a neuroinflammatory lipid.
I think the ApoE is the main thing that's really the only thing that's kind of been valuable.
If you look at like GWAS studies from like, there's one in Nature Genetics from 2014, and there's been several others. I
mean, you don't need to look at any studies, right? ApoE is the main thing people focus on from a genetics perspective. I mean, that is the cardinal, other than autosomal dominant, ApoE is it, right? I mean, that's the thing.
No, there's others. And
so you're telling me that when you go to get a gene panel, ApoE is not the most important contributor to familial Alzheimer's?
So I'm saying it's very important, but I'm saying it's also part of this neuroinflammatory cascade that's happening.
But in terms of the most important gene for familial Alzheimer's?
Yeah, it's the most important one, but the way it works is through this neuroinflammatory cascade. It's
you think
sort
so?
of it's inconsistent with what I'm saying. Yeah.
How do you think it's neuroinflammatory? What part of it do you think? What's its job?
So there's a paper that actually goes into the mechanism of this.
But is it a transcription factor? Is it a protein that does something specific? Pretty sure it has like a specific function.
It's like a lipid, right?
Right.
It's found in so I think it has to do with this stability of these like endothelial cells or the membranes as part of like lymphatic clearance. And so what I'm trying to get to, right, let me just kind of finish what I was trying to say. The lymphatic system is meant to clear out the brain. If you don't have good clearance over the course of decades, you eventually accumulate all this junk and it kills the brain. there's a lot of risk factors with respect to neuroimmune genes like ApoE and BIN1 and IBO. There's a lot of these markers that have been kind of accumulating on microglia and astrocytic genes more than neuronal cells. And then the other risk factors involve like cardiovascular risk factors. So people who have diabetes, people who have statins. And so basically you have kind of a motivation to keep those vessels nice and clean and open. And so this back to this mechanistic paper from 2017, basically this is coming out of Ben Baer's lab. And it's kind of a shame because Ben Baer's published this in 2017, kind of, you know, shaking up the world a little bit. And then he actually died that year from pancreatic cancer. And there hasn't been a lot of follow-up. There's been a few papers here and there, but, you know, it's kind of tough when you lose the leader in the space. But what he found is that these amyloid species kind of start to accumulate in the brain. And then that leads to activation of the microglia and then eventually up the astrocytes. And together they start to kill off the neurons. And he found, if you look at, I don't know if you have it open, if you look at like figure 1A, there's like kind of two distinct types of astrocytes that he found, this like A1 and A2, and it's the A1s that are actually neurotoxic, right? And the whole paper kind of goes into the mechanistic drivers of these A1 cells and their killing capacity, and they're dependent on IL-1 alpha, TNF, and C1q, whereas these other A2 non-killing astrocytes just don't have these expressed at all. And then kind of later on in the paper, they go on to prove that like just activating these three factors is necessary and sufficient to create kind of killing astrocytes. So I don't know, like maybe, you know, XPro is just one of those three legs of the stool. It's maybe not enough. But I think it's certainly interesting. And then, you know, going back to XPro and the design of the trial itself, you know, this, I think one of the criticisms is rightfully so, is like, this is a 200 patient study over 6 months or so, which is like, you know, basically lecanemab and Kasuna are like 2,000 in like 2 years. But actually, if you look closely at the data, lecanemab would have hit stat sig or been very close to it at 6 months.
With a lot of patients.
With 2,000 patients, that's for sure. But INmune had an interim analysis, right? And they looked at like the standard deviation, and they saw that it was consistent with their powering assumptions. So I think, you know, at least that's behaving okay. And then the other thing is they're enriching their trial for patients who are thought to be kind of like super responders or super progressors. And so they have things like ApoE positivity, they have diabetics, they have elevated ESR, which is like an inflammatory biomarker, and elevated CRP. And you have to have like, you know, one of these 5 markers, and like 20% of them have double, or at least 2 of them. And so like you have this kind of setup where you're accumulating patients that are probably on a rapid progression because of just how sick they are from a cardiovascular perspective to Alzheimer's progression. At the same time, like lecanemab was pretty close, or if not likely to hit stat sig at 6 months. And so like this drug, I think we know from the science paper, and I think you did a lot of good work on this, is definitely active. And so the question is not, is this a real drug? Is like, it's more like, does it work? And I think there's just enough tidbits here, including their own, like, you know, albeit weak biomarker data, to suggest this thing is definitely anti-inflammatory, and it potentially could be doing something, as evidenced by like some of the MRI scans where they see like more white matter remyelination, and you know, the reductions in like NFL, neurofilament light protein, and as well as some of the other inflammatory markers. I think there is still a question of like, does it need to get into the brain? And on that point, like, I'm not sure that it matters that much. Maybe the little amount that does get into the brain should be enough. But if you look at like, the TNF alpha inhibitors, those therapies are able to like reduce the incidence of Alzheimer's in patients with RA, with rheumatoid arthritis, and they're not getting into the brain.
That's a lot of that's a little bit of a dubious statement, but
no, I mean there was a paper published in PLOS One a couple of years ago.
Was it a prospective clinical trial?
No,
okay.
No, it was
just
like basically looking at like it was basically looking at tens of thousands of just patient data from like EHR or whatever. Where basically
you can't take the EHR data to the FDA and get approval, right?
No. What I'm saying is like there's evidence to suggest that these TNF antibodies are protective against Alzheimer's. And yeah, it's not high quality data. That's what I'm saying is like this whole story is like standing up on, like twigs and like together with like staples and bubblegum. But
yeah,
it is like it's definitely like enticing. And I think, with like a 5-to-1 payout, I don't know that like that basically implies, I guess like maybe 20% chance that it's successful. And I think it might be, I think it's a little better than that.
Yeah. You could say it's 100-to-1 payout. You could say it's a 2-to-1 pay. I mean, that's kind of an arbitrary.
No, but on the day of, it probably goes to $1 billion, right?
I don't know. You could go to 10 billion. I really don't know. It's hard to say.
I think it's hard to say for sure. I mean, the thing is like massively shorted and no one thinks it's going to work. It's definitely going to zero if it fails.
You think so?
Or like, yeah, it'll go to cash.
Do you think like what happens to you if you think they say that they need more time to analyze the data, the primary endpoint was not met, but they're encouraging trends? What do you think happens?
I think the Emax needs to kind of have a strong trend.
Like better than 0.1 maybe, or 0.2, or?
I mean, they think they can hit stats if you talk to them.
No, I know. I'm sure they think they can. They designed the study that way. But in terms of,
it needs to be compelling enough because like these guys need cash.
And is that 0.1 or 0.2 or?
If it's, I think it has to be like 0.3.
0.03 or 0.3?
0.3.
So 0.3 or better.
Yeah, like on the delta basis.
No, I'm talking about p-value.
Oh, p-value. It also depends on if they present the curves. I don't know that you can really get away with anything less than 0.1.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Anything more than 0.1. Yeah. So I think it has to be pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a chance that the general. I mean, by the way, are you an institutional investor or?
Yeah.
Okay, but you haven't filed on the stock or 13F or anything.
No.
There's no shortage of long opportunity if you believe in it, right? So.
But that's what I'm saying is like I just think that every data point is very weak, but it all trends in the right direction. And even like I think you did a good job of looking at that neurology paper where they looked at the Enbrel in these patients in the UK, and it was like touted to be a failure by the industry. But I think you kind of saw that, hey, there's like an effect here, and
I wouldn't say there's an effect, but it's worth putting magnifying glass on.
Right, exactly. And so that's the point, is just like, who knows, like it's probably 50-50 or so, maybe worse than that, but it's not like 10 to 15%, I don't think.
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of like small bets you kind of, make, and it's like certainly better than a lottery ticket.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously have a difference of opinion. One of the things that concerns me is their cytokine panel. So the panel showed that at the highest dose, they reduced some of those cytokines that are in the paper you showed me by only 10 or 15%. And, we all know that TNF is just a mediator of gene expression. That does not actively do anything, right? It's a downstream effector, just like NF-kappa B or even IL-6 or IL-1. And the genes that it's supposed to turn on or off, it's not really moving the expression needle very much. Is 10% cytokine changes enough? That seems to me like maybe a day of drinking. Is it enough to really move the needle?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I'd say that like it's 10 to 15% on average, and they have other ones that are standing out there in like the 25-40% range. Who knows if they picked the right ones? Like, this is also CSF. Like, what is the baseline level of that versus what is it at the local tissue level? I just think like
they also didn't do a
so much
placebo group in this phase 1, so you can't even trust this 10% data. Yeah. I mean, what if this is
well, you can assume the 0.3 mg/kg is like placebo, right? Because it probably doesn't have much of an effect.
Yeah, well, they didn't even show all the data. In fact, like you really do need a placebo. I mean, I've designed some drugs, done a lot of trials. It's pretty good to have it doesn't cost much. Just do a trial with some data that shows you, because like actually the PK tells you that 0.3 is probably active as well. And 0.6 is definitely active. Where's that data? So I feel like
it's there.
Well, they've never published anything. Which is wonderful, because we know how that works out. And I would assume it's not for lack of trying. I mean, how hard is it to publish phase 1 data in some cruddy journal? Like,
I asked them that, and they basically were like, we prioritize on other things, which is like not a great answer. And I agree with you. It's like totally sketchy. Yeah, it's kind of clowny and sketchy. And the thing is, though, that they like kind of bootstrapped this whole thing. Like, they own most of the company, and like they kind of just scrapped together $4 or $5 million and like did this thing. It's a pet project. They're running out of Boca Raton. Like, there's a lot of yellow flags here. But it's just so sexy from like a biology perspective.
We can talk about that too in a second. But in terms of like the phase 1 data, very, very modest change in cytokine, and that's kind of cherry picking, because was the 0.6 data that didn't lower cytokine levels, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like up a little bit to flat.
So I don't know how many medicines that at 0.6. One, I appreciate the conversation. None of this is ad hominem whatsoever. So don't take any of this personally, and vice versa. This is a great conversation. It's obvious that you're not one of these crazies in their Discord. I mean, if 0.6x of a dose does something that 1.0x of a dose doesn't do, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There's not too many medicines that work that way. Yeah,
but do you think the drug is not active, or you think it's not active in the brain?
It could be. I mean, well, the only readout we have to go off of, right, is this panel. And if the drug in that...
And the tau data.
We can, yes, we'll look at that in a second next. But starting with the panel, if this is a legitimate assay, 0.6 should show just as much effect as 1.0. Now, of course, as you know, and everybody knows, there's some like saturable gradient that you might have to overcome, right? Like there's, there are drugs that don't work. And once they reach a threshold, they start working. But it would seem like the 0.6 is very, very close to 1.0. It's a very small difference, not even a doubling of the drug. And, the effect at 1 mg is not very high. In fact, I would say it's placebo-like. So to me, that data is enough to say that you're not getting target engagement. I mean, target engagement should just jump off the screen, right? Biological result, you can wait on that. But the way I was taught to make medicine is, you try to find the target engagement. And, this is like, especially without a placebo group, you look at the other doses as, okay, do these engage the target? And, usually you do some different, like 0.3, 0.6, 1.0. They did a 3.0 in cancer, interestingly. They decided to back off that dose. Not sure why. But it seems to me like, I'm not sure they found their target engagement, but they went ahead anyway with the phase 2, at least on the cytokine panel. I'm a little mystified. Okay, so biology. So you're familiar with my...
Well, what about the tau data? Like, what do you think about that?
I don't even have their data because like it's scattered across like hundreds of little presentations that no longer even exist.
Oh, you can look at the corporate deck.
Yeah, it's just like, this isn't... It's like so cruddy,
sure.
But while I look that up, talking about biology, I'm sure you're familiar with my prednisone thesis.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, it's a good point, but prednisone on its own is like, it can cause like delirium and like has like a lot of other issues with it.
But on a mean basis, it does not. The average person does not lose their mind when they take prednisone.
But people who are like, you know, on the cusp of losing their mind do tend to have more side effects.
Yeah, I don't know. That's sort of like a bit of an unpublished statement. I mean, I think that the acceleration of delirium or deliria with dementia, it's actually fairly rare. I do think there's side effects with long-term prednisone, which is why we don't give it. But you would think the master switch drug that sort of encompasses TNF, it's not a good thing that it doesn't seem to help. It's not like the second you pop a prednisone, you start losing your mind. We all know that's not the case.
I mean, it kind of does. Like, people get delirious.
Do you?
They get confused, disoriented.
You've taken prednisone, right?
I haven't taken it, but I've taken other weaker ones, and it definitely, for me anyway, at least, makes me a little manic.
Yeah, it can have different psychiatric effects like that, but I think it doesn't turn you into demented. I mean, that's fairly rare, and there's dose reduction and stuff like that. But ultimately, I think that the gradient of how much immunosuppression and anti-inflammatory are you getting out of prednisone, interrupting the disease process versus it's doing that so heavy that it's causing dementia. I'm not sure that those are the same ends of the same curve, right? So like, I think you almost want it. I don't think it's a good sign that, one, TNFs don't help you in MS. Two, TNFs, or the little bit of data we have in TNFs in Alzheimer's is murky. And then three, steroids don't seem to help you, in Alzheimer's. In many other auto-inflammatory like NSAIDs, COX-2, et cetera, they don't help either. And by the way, as you know, I'm trying to read every paper on TNF-alpha and Alzheimer's. There were many, many people that did these little preclinical studies of, atorvastatin cures the mouse with Alzheimer's. Naproxen cures the mouse with Alzheimer's. Celecoxib cures the mouse with Alzheimer's. And of course, all those trials didn't replicate in humans. Despite huge trials, there wasn't even a trend. In prednisone, I mean, it seems to accelerate, dementia, which to me seems to suggest that maybe you do need TNF-alpha in the brain to help clear cellular debris, including, through glymphatics. You want some, of the TNF death receptor properties that are going to help you grab all this broken stuff and throw it away. Otherwise, you might actually get more accumulation of this stuff and get yourself into way more trouble. So, to me, if this was really all an inflammation problem, naproxen, celecoxib, steroids, something might work in that vein. I think Alzheimer's could be very, very different, and we just don't know what's going on, whether it's complement or it could be something like, iron related. It could be ferroptosis kind of thing. It could be one of these things where it's autophagy kind of ubiquitome related. We just don't really know, and we also don't know when you can start treatment and when do these things flip maybe from being beneficial in the case of TNF to being not beneficial. It's just a lot of question marks, and I'm not sure these guys have done a great job of answering any of it. It's not the worst thesis I've ever seen. I mean, it's not 𝗣𝗎𝗏. 𝗣𝗎𝗏 was worse.
Yeah, right. That just didn't even have a mechanism. It was just like a dart on the wall. Okay. I mean, some of those are fair points. I mean, I don't know if you've seen these meta-analyses with like
Yes.
NSAID exposure and reduced Alzheimer's risk.
Yes.
I mean, those are kind of interesting. And
There are data that fail to replicate.
Did you see this New Amsterdam this week?
What they do.
They have this drug, obicetrapib, that helps with...
I'm familiar with it.
Or I think it was last week. But they have a cohort in their trial.
The Alzheimer's cohort.
Disease. Yeah, and they showed some preservation there. With a biomarker. I mean, and then like there's the GLP-1 study that's running this year, and that should read out like around fourth quarter. We know that GLP-1 helps a lot with the cardiovascular risk, but also reduces things like CRP, just kind of downstream of these inflammatory things. So I hear you on the prednisone thing. I just think like prednisone is napalm, and prednisone doesn't help with like a heart attack, but aspirin does. You know what I mean?
My experience in this world is that when you have nothing to go on, you have to go to the next best thing. And the next best thing gives you some tea leaves. Like, hey, they tried deep immunosuppression and Alzheimer's didn't work. They tried deep autoinflammatory and Alzheimer's didn't work. So I think a lot of pharma say is, like, even with the million X upside for Humira or for ImmuneX and Amgen and all these companies, like, it's still not worth. Now, look, pharma's stupid. They make mistakes all the time. But I know the AbbVie guys. They are not stupid. I'm surprised they never did a study of Humira. Maybe it's because of BBB stuff, but it's still surprising because you would think you could do a peripheral sync where you solubilize the peripheral TNF and then you create a concentration gradient from the BBB. This is what, of course, the A-beta antibodies did. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's not the worst idea in the world for sure. It's just a question of like, as well as anybody, how many nodes there are in the autoimmune landscape. You can do IL-1, you could do IL-6, you could do TREM2, you could do NF-kappa B. There's 100 ways to interrogate the immune system. Which one is the one that's going to win?
Right.
If any. And going through it one trial at a time, praying for serendipity, that's like I mean, it's definitely begs the question of like, do you look at the world as like, I'm writing the lotto ticket, or do you look at the world as like you're saying, like if it's a 30% chance of success, I mean, you would buy these every day, but you also do need to hit at some point. we at least for Alzheimer's, we haven't hit yet, and it could start. I mean, they didn't hit for obesity for a long time, and now we got all kinds of great mechanisms for obesity. So
if you think it's like, you think it's like 30 to 40% chance, and it's actually 30 to 40% chance, and you make a 5x off of that, and you do take those every time. It's kind of Bayesian, right? You have to make sure you're actually swinging at 30 to 40% chance events.
And you get some, you're getting the privates, you're getting, the big pharma bets that you don't really get exposure to. So like, this is like one bet, but, Elector was another, but a bunch of these are like either not for profit or they're inside big pharma. So like, you might get that 30, 40% at Lilly.
And on the pharma side, like I would say that they're pretty like risk averse. Like these BD guys,
I agree.
Like don't really want to take a lot of risks, even the R&D guys. And there's not really a market for Alzheimer's just yet. I mean, we had the whole aducanumab or Aduhelm and lecanemab debacles with the FDA. And I think part of the reason the FDA was, eager to push those through is because if you don't approve anything for Alzheimer's, no one's going to develop anything.
Right.
So, to have like at least a pathway on something that's crappy but has like signals of efficacy kind of starts to make that market. And, that only happened in the last couple of years. So for like AbbVie and Pfizer to like not push the immune thesis in Alzheimer's isn't like that surprising.
Yeah. I mean, I think some have tried, right? Abbott, not AbbVie more, but Abbott has definitely gone into this territory. I think Lilly, is pretty aggressive, but Lilly partnered with my friend's privately held company, extremely early stage. So I think there's some people interested. I mean, Biogen did a few things.
It's just early days.
Yeah, I think that if it were me, I would do a 5-year clinical trial. I would do 1,000 patients, and I would do it as subclinical as possible. But, reality is it's really hard to do that way. And as I constructed this, panel of all autoimmune drugs and where they've been tested, it's a really fascinating thing because I thought I knew this space. I mean, this is like half of all biopharma, is autoimmune, autoinflammatory. And what's interesting is, I thought at some point Biogen tried to do or wanted to do VLA4 𝗙𝗢𝗡 for Alzheimer's because it makes a ton of sense. And they didn't. I thought maybe you try CD20 for Alzheimer's. Never been tried. So you haven't tried B cells or T cells. And
yeah, but the microglia are they're macrophages, they're monocytes.
Right. But they still, it's still possible that there's look at MS, right? It's a T cell or B cell.
Totally different though.
Well, you have, is it?
One is one is an autoimmune waxing and waning disease, and the other is a neurodegenerative progressive disease.
Why does CD20 work and why does VLA4 work?
Yeah, it works for MS because those are basically the B cells and T cells get into the brain.
Yes.
But that's not what happens in Alzheimer's. This is like monocyte driven. It's like it's targeting a different arm of the immune system. It's the innate immune system.
Well, TNFs were tried once, as we know, with kind of a little bit of a weird, answer there. And then steroids, do target both. And, there's other attempts that have failed. IVIG is another one. But yeah, most of these attempts haven't been tried, and there've been definitely worse ideas out there. TNF was tried in asthma. TNF was tried in all kinds of places, and none of them really panned out. So it's not that clear. Like TNF was tried in sepsis, which you could argue is maybe a little bit like AD. So it's pretty interesting to see where these things work and where they don't. Even TNF not working in osteoarthritis is somewhat interesting. But yeah, I understand you have a heavy autoimmune disease in MS, but you still have downstream effectors that are kind of overlapping. And so making it worse is very eye-opening. It's a different disease, no doubt about it, but it does seem to drive the disease. And to me, that's pretty alarming because if a brain autoimmune disease using TNF, you think would help. Anti-TNF, of course, but we'll see.
So what's your criticism of the the payer data that shows Alzheimer's disease is protected in patients who get these drugs?
There are data that conflict with it. So as you know, when you do a big old, search of a very big space, you'll find what you're looking for. Things will jump out by accident, but there have been attempts to replicate the data that have not gone well. So that's kind of I've seen like there's an abatacept paper where they compare abatacept to TNF, and they found that it's no better than abatacept at preventing Alzheimer's, which is not at all. So I think it depends on the health data you look at. And you also have big problem with like correlation causation. Is there another explanation for the result? Could it be that these patients are of a certain demographic where they're getting TNFs? Could it be that there's some other confounder? There usually is, that is more likely, including chance, than explaining a causal phenomenon. And again, in certain other, if there was a really strong causal phenomenon, you would not have efficacy. Now, one of the problems is almost all RA patients are treated with with these drugs at some point. You know, so it's kind of messy data to begin with, but.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, these are just massive data sets and then work across multiple drugs.
Yeah, I think the data sets,
inhibitors.
I've seen some papers that have failed to replicate it. So to me, it's like a classic post hoc observation that just can't be really relied upon. And it's driving a lot of the investment thesis here. I heard this thesis 10 years ago, by the way, in different pharma corners talking about, you know, I had a friend, very successful entrepreneur, who said, if you have a family member with Alzheimer's, get them on Enbrel. And they pointed to this data that I think started roughly 10 years ago, but nobody really bid on it. I mean, everybody sent it around and talked about it, and, you know, the INmune guys bid on it. But, you know, it's intriguing, you know, but I don't know if it's convincing enough to go do a clinical trial. Especially given
or run a better one.
Yeah. I mean, if they get a signal, they get a signal, right? As long as do you think they're gonna? Let me ask you this: do you think they're gonna put out the top line data?
Yeah, they're gonna put it out next week.
So definitely Emax X, Emax Y.
It's gonna be Emax and CDR, some of the secondaries.
But they're not gonna like say it wasn't stat sig, or they're gonna say, you know, trended.
They're gonna give everything.
Okay. If they give the top line numbers, I'll be happy.
Yeah, it'll give top line numbers.
I would make a side bet with you that it makes it worse. Not a real money side bet, but just a gentleman's bet.
Okay. Okay, I will take that for sure.
All right, you're on. I'll bet you a nice Coca-Cola or something.
You should pull up this tumor necrosis. TNF blocking agents are associated with lower risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, I've seen these. Yeah, I mean,
the +1. Yeah.
There are recent papers that dispute this, and I think that I don't know, I feel like I'm very stubborn with retrospective data.
Yeah, that's fair.